Module 1 Lecture 4 The Tails. This group of letters has been named the tails because they all have a semicircle that clings onto their ends that looks a bit like the tail of an animal. These all behave in a very similar way in the language. The first letter that we have in this group is called seen. The seen is characterized by two small semicircles that combine to look like a W that is sitting on the line, followed by a larger semicircle that extends below the line and returns to finish just above it, what I've termed a tail here. The sound that it produces is equivalent to the English S in words like sun or sea. This letter is quite easy to remember if you imagine the two semicircles at the beginning to be waves in the sea. The word sea begins with the letter S, which is exactly the sound produced by the letter seen. Practice. Seen. S. Seen. S. Seen. S. The next letter that we have is called sheen. The sheen looks exactly like the seen, except that it has three dots placed above the two semicircles. The sound that it produces is equivalent to the SH sound in words like sheep and shake. If we continue with our waves of the sea example with seen, we can imagine these waves drifting endlessly until they reach the shore, where we find free pebbles or stones. The sh sound in shore should remind you of the sh sound for sheen. Practice. Sheen. Sh. Sheen. Sh. Sheen. Sh. The next letter that we have in this group is called sod. The sod is one of four rounded or emphatic letters that we will learn about later on. The sod is characterized by an elongated circular shape that is situated above the line that looks like a balloon pointing northeast. It shares that same curved shape of the seen and the sheen. The sound that it produces is like the S sound in seen that has been rounded. Ideally, you want to compress your lips as you would when whistling, for example. Then, whilst holding that position throughout, say the letter sod. If you've done it right, it should give out a rounded so sound as opposed to the more flat s in seen. I often equate it to an Italian-American New Yorker saying sorry with a bit more exaggeration. This letter looks a little bit like a saw, with the left side being its handle and the right side the blade. Whenever you see it, think of a saw, and you'll find that the letter S in the word saw should remind you of the so sound for sod. Use the balloon shape to remind you that this letter has a rounded S sound. Practice. Sod, so, sod, so, sod, so. The final letter in this group is called dod. The dod is also one of 4 rounded or emphatic letters that we will talk about later on. Its appearance is exactly the same as the sod, except that there is a dot placed above it. As to its pronunciation, it is like the d sound in dal that has been rounded. Once again, you want to compress your lips as you would do when whistling, for example. Then, whilst holding that position throughout, say the letter dod. Now, if you've done it right, it should give out a rounded d sound, as opposed to the more flat d in dal. If we stay with our example of the saw, we can imagine using the saw to cut a piece of wood. The dot could represent the saw dust that is flying around everywhere. The D from the word dust should remind you of the d sound for dod. Once again, you could use the round balloon shape to remind you that this is a rounded d sound. Practice. Dod, do, dod, do, dod, do.